Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to look at a unique opening, the Black Knights Tango, some tactical misses. We have killer shots and incredible resources. We're going to look at an unexpected exchange sacrifice that offers a dynamic balance in the game, a king safety lesson as I push some of the pawns in front of my king, which I regret later, and a rook and knight endgame battle. So we're going on a journey through the different phases of the game, strategic choices, tactical fireworks, and the critical endgame decisions that decide the outcome of this game. So let's dive right in. I'm playing the white pieces, and with both knights out against d4 and c4, this is called the Black Knights Tango. So I play knight c3 and now pawn to e5. It's a tricky line. It scores well in practice, but with accurate play, white should be able to get a pretty significant advantage, and you have to play d5 here to claim that advantage. It grabs this space in the center. So now you can see the knight already looks a little bit funny. It's moved twice, and it's going to have to move a third time just to bring out the bishop. So I play e4, knight g6, and now here I play a3. And I think this is a good move, but it's a little bit more complicated than if you play 6 pawn to h4. So this is what I would recommend in the future if I played this line. If you guys face this line, play pawn to h4. Here's why. The pawn is about to head to h5, kicking that knight that's already moved 3 times. Now, if black plays h5 to stop this pawn, this will make it difficult for black to castle later if we play knight g to e2, because after bishop c5, bishop g5, d6, knight g3, what happens is we have both queen and knight attacking the pawn. Black has knight and rook defending it, but if black were to castle here, that simply drops the pawn. So this position is very difficult to play for black, and it's already a nice 0.5 to 1.0 advantage for us. But in the game I played pawn to a3. This is an okay move, but after bishop to c5, I had to be confident playing pawn to b4 here. And I looked at this move, but I didn't like bishop to d4 in reply. But there's a cool line. Knight e2. If knight takes e4 trying to utilize this pin, you can ignore the pin and say, I'll take your knight, sacrifice my rook, play pawn to h4, and now there's threats of pawn to h5 or pawn to d6. And even though the material count says +3 for black, this is already a +1 stockfish advantage for white. So in your guys' own games, I want you to create takeaways and have things that you're currently working on in future games. Something that I'm working on is exchange sacrifices. I tend to value the material more than the activity. This is a perfect example of it. The activity here is more important than the material. So I need to learn from this for future games. So back to the game. After bishop c5, I play pawn to h3, and now black is already back to equal, and we're only on move 7. He castles, knight f3, a5, rook b1. What I'm trying to do here is expand queenside. I felt I had an advantage over here on the queenside, but this bishop is such a good piece on this diagonal, and after d6, I will never be able to safely play c5, or at least not anytime soon. So these next couple moves for me actually provoke weaknesses on the queen side. d6, b4, takes, bishop back. So look at how the black rook controls the a file. My rook on b1 could be attacked later by a bishop on f5. This pawn is now potentially loose, so I'm not playing this very well positionally. And now I play pawn to g3. This starts to open up my king position. So I'm sort of throwing fuel on the fire. I already have weaknesses, and now I'm making my king's safety even worse by playing g3, because that weakens this square and this square. Every time you push a pawn in front of where your king is going to be, or where he's currently sitting, that could create potential weaknesses. That's a major takeaway. He plays queen e7. Interesting here, the computer likes pawn to c5 as a way to try to open up these dark squares, and if I take on passant, maybe get the bishop into e6. So I go bishop g2, h6, queen e2, knight h7, and black's plan here is to play f5. When you see these pawns pointing towards the king side, that tends to mean that black should attack king side, and the way to do that is to play pawn to f5. Now I play h4. I'm trying to fight for counterplay with the h-pawn, but really this ignores the fact that black can still play h5, And this knight could always retreat back to h8 and reroute later if I go h5. So what I should have done is simply castle here. If I castle f5, I can take the pawn and create a blockade on this e4 square. So after knight f6, knight f to d2, and look at how solid this position is, right? Everything is defended. I'm focused on e4. All four of these pieces are trying to control the e4 square, and this makes it difficult for black to really push for any advantage, and the eval bar shows equal. But I play h4, not a great move, and I played a move like this in the previous video that I showed, and I think it's just something for me to work on. Sometimes pushing the rook pawn is good, but not when the f pawn's coming at you in return. When you push the rook pawn and the f pawn's coming back at you, it tends to favor the f pawn, I think. So f5 played, h5, knight h8, a cool move. It looks funny having the knight here, but it's going to reroute later. Bishop to e3. What I'm trying to do here is swap pieces to reduce black's attacking chances. I was very uncomfortable in this position, but again, I should simply castle. It's safer to castle than to allow this trade. And the reason why is after the trade, now f4 becomes super strong. My opponent missed it. Let's just see why. Pawn to f4, takes, queen d4, bishop g4. Black has a big advantage now. Look at the pressure down the e file. Look at the pressure on this diagonal. These knights are about to jump into the game. This rook controls the a file, and my king is a sitting duck on e1. This is a terrible position for white. Fortunately, he played rook to a3, and I'm able to play queen to c1, poking at the rook. And then he plays f takes e4. An interesting move, he goes for an exchange sacrifice, allowing queen takes a3. And again, the exchange sacrifice starts to haunt me. Every single game I look at exchange sacrifices and I make wrong decisions. So I need to learn from this. I should ignore that rook and play knight to h4. And the idea is knight takes e4 coming next, creating that stronghold on the e4 square again with knight and bishop guarding it. But instead I go for the material. So material over activity. It's a flaw in my game and I'm working on it. He plays e takes f3, bishop to h3. So I'm going for more trades. One of my takeaways is to play more endgames. It works out in this position because I don't get punished. Bishop takes, rook takes. But here, getting a move like e4 in right now would have been critical. The reason for that is my king is still stuck in the center. This rook is not ready to help guard the e4 square, which we're going to see next. So after knight g5, rook h4, now e4 had less bite in the game. What I should have played here is queen c1 and queen e3, create this nice little blockade. But instead, I played knight d1. It's a difficult position for both sides, but you can see these tactics are creating a lot of spikes and dips in the eval, right? So there's a lot of chances for both sides to really punish the other player. Knight f7, heading to the e5 square. Knight e3, so I'm using the knight to blockade. Knight e5, queen c3, knight d3 check, and now my king goes to f1. That's the only move. He has to guard the f pawn. But look at how this pawn is controlling e2 and g2. The knight controls e1. This king is in some danger here, even though it's just pawns and knights around the area. So I have to be careful about sort of back rank mate stuff because my king cannot move off the first rank. Rook to a1, bringing the rook into the game. Sorry, rook to a8. Rook to a1, challenge the rook. And here I did feel the position was slightly worse, but I felt that I was holding. Queen to f8 played, defending the rook. And I played knight c2, c6. Now here I was surprised by this because prior to c6, I felt that it was very difficult for me to make any progress. I'm rated 2200 and black was rated in the 1700s, so I felt that I really need to press for a win here, and I wasn't sure how to do it. c6 seemed to create some chances. So I trade rooks, trade a set of pawns, and now here, one of my endgame rules is passed pawns pose problems, but in this case, the passed pawn creation by playing pawn to b5 actually gives black an advantage because my lack of king safety, right? So opening things up with b5 was not the strongest move. What I should have played here is actually an exchange sacrifice again. Rook takes e4, And after knight takes, queen takes d3. So another exchange sacrifice. I just got to keep working on them, keep evaluating them, keep learning from them. But instead, I play for the passed pawn, takes, queen d5. If this queen gets down to the first rank, this is bad news, and the clocks were starting to get low as we approach this endgame. I was getting nervous. So I'm going back to one of my takeaways, play more endgames, and here I decide, let's sacrifice the b pawn to get a queen trade. And this does pay off. So I play knight e3, attacking the queen, takes the pawn, and now check, attacking king and queen at the same time. So the queen has to take, knight takes, d5. So here the position is equal in terms of stockfish eval and in terms of material, but I felt I had better winning chances and I could pose difficult questions to my opponent. That's another one of the endgame rules to play for a win. Give your opponent difficult questions to solve. What I'm going to do is attack this pawn a couple times, get this knight to move off of d3 to defend the pawn, and then I'm looking to play rook f4, rook f5, and then my rook is free. Once I activate this rook, I felt that I had better chances to play for the win. So knight e3, attacking the pawn. This knight defends the pawn, and now rook f4. And the rook is coming to f5 next, pressuring that guy again, and then he's free. So my opponent plays g6, trying to control rook f5, but now the rook sinks into f6. This is an already difficult position for black. The only move that holds is g takes h. Everything else gives white a pretty significant advantage. And my opponent missed g takes h. He played pawn to d4. This is a blunder. Now it's a win with best play. Rook takes g6, king f7. But then I did miss a move back here. What I need to play is knight f5 or knight g4, threatening the capture knight takes h6 check. Then this knight's attacked and the h-pawn runs free. That's a pretty easy win now that I see it. But in the game, I was kind of stuck on this move knight to c4, which blunders back because there's this cool idea. My opponent missed it, but knight to c2 actually holds the draw with best play. For example, let's say rook to c6 is played. His king can come after my rook. And if knight b2, pawn to d3, defending the knight. And if knight d1, knight can actually head to f7, then to d6. And these are all pretty solid. Surprisingly, black is doing just fine here. He can march his king up. And I would say this looks a little scary for white just because there is this passed pawn on the third rank. And it feels like white's just playing defense here. So interesting, knight to c2 does hold the draw. Instead, though, in the game, he played knight to d3, and this ended up being the decisive mistake. Rook takes h6, king moves back. He's trying to avoid any sort of forks. I check, rook g6, and the problem now is the knight's going to drop. And if he doesn't play king g7, let's say he goes the other way, I'm still going to play rook g6 and push the h-pawn up the board. So that concludes the game. Couple major takeaways there. Exchange sacrifices were one of them, and there was a lot of positional ideas to learn from in terms of just how to play that pawn structure and king safety. So let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.